Hey y'all, welcome to part 2 of this mini-series on bitmap tracing and node editing. In this video we're going to get a little bit more in depth in the node editing department, but we're also going to try something different in the bitmap tracing. Now if you recall the first video, we did a simple black and white image. This time we're going to go ahead and do a relatively simple color image. And you can see this is just a heart profile with a Valentine's heart profile with a couple of silhouettes within them. Basically we have red here, but we have some shading of the red, so that's several different colors involved here. And we'll go ahead and we'll get started in VCarve to get that bitmap traced and show you kind of what goes into selecting a color image for tracing. Now if you did not see the first video in this series, I'll go ahead and I'll put a card up here right about now where you can take a look at that series, and in the end screen to this video I'll put a link to the playlist for this entire series. So let's go ahead and get started here. We're going to create a new file. It's a single-sided job. I'm going to make my job size 12 inches wide in X, 12 inches high in Y, and I'm going to use a nominal Z thickness of 3/4 of an inch. Now I'm going to set my Z0 position to the material surface. And for layout purposes, I'm going to set it my XY datum in the center. We'll go ahead and we'll click OK, and that gets our material set up. The image I'm going to use, I've already shown you here, and I've put a link in the description box to a direct link to the page where you can download this image should you decide that you want to get it and try this yourself. So the first thing we need to do is go ahead and import our bitmap image by coming here under File Operations and clicking the Import Bitmap icon. I'll go ahead and double click on our image, and there we go. With our bitmap selected, let's go ahead and click on the Trace Bitmap icon over here under Create Vectors. Since this is a color image, I'm going to go ahead and show you a basic method on how to use the color bitmap tracing type. It looks like it's just red and white, but as you can see there are several different shades of red within here. We could go crazy checking boxes and selecting which colors of red we want to actually use here, but rather than doing that, we can also use this slider. We want to select all of the red. Now you see here under number, colors, and threshold we currently have a max of 16. If we start reducing that number, we can see that some of the red choices are going away until we get down here to the minimum. And what this basically means is that if we put a check mark right there, all of the red in this bitmap are going to be traced. And since that's what we want, that's the simplest way to do that. Now in this particular image, it works. Now I'm not going to mess around with the corner fit, the noise filter, or bitmap fading just yet. I'm going to go ahead and just preview it and see what that gives us. Now if I'm looking over here, I can see a little bit of noise. We have these stray pixels over here. So now's the time to play around with this. Let me go ahead and bump this up to 3 pixels, hit preview, and that gets rid of that stray piece of noise up here without compromising the rest of the bitmap image. I don't see any other areas where that would take any effect. So that actually worked out rather well, switching up to 3 pixels to take care of that. As I look down here in the faces, I see we've got a very nice tight corner fit here, but not so much here. And now is the time to take a look at this and decide, does the shape look pleasing? No, it's not following the bitmap exactly, but only because the bitmap is rather jagged right in here. So if we back out, yes, there's a little bit of a gap there, but the vector actually does look rather pleasing. It's holding on to, it's hugging the shape of the bitmap just fine. There's a few angles here that I think are kind of funny, but I think we can clean those up in node editing without really worrying about it. So I think I'll go ahead and I'm just going to accept this the way it is. Now, if you should decide you want to make some further adjustments, you can make all the adjustments you'd like with your bitmap fading, your noise filter, and your corner fit, as I explained in the first video of this series. And you can keep adjusting and hitting preview and adjust and preview and adjust, and you're fine. It does not actually create any vectors until you hit that apply button. Once you hit that apply button, you'll either have to delete the vectors and start over, or you'll have to edit them in node editing. I kind of like what we've got right here, so I'm going to hit apply, then close the bitmap tracing. We now have our vectors with our bitmap image turned on. Now it's turned on, excuse me. I want to go ahead and shut down this bitmap layer so I can just focus on my vectors and see how well this traced. So I'll come up here to Layer Manager and turn off the bitmap layer, and we have a pretty decent tracing. Probably the first thing I notice is it's off center. If we look here, we see the bottom point of our heart is way off of the center line, and the top point of the heart is way off the center line. So I want to go ahead and get this aligned as close to the center as I possibly can. So I'll select both vectors, come up here, and align those vectors to the material. Now that did change it a little bit. And if I zoom up in here, I see that the top point of my heart is now on my center line here for X, but the bottom point is not. So I want to go ahead and rotate this just slightly before I do anything else. So with all of the vectors selected so that all of them move at the same rate at the same time, I'll come over here under Transform Objects and click on Rotate Selected Objects. Now when I open up the Rotate Selection Objects dialog, you can see here I have this circle. This is the rotation point. Now I want to rotate the entire drawing based right there. That's in the correct place, and I don't want that to move. So I'll put my cursor over that rotation point and drag it up here right to that point. Right there. Now, when I zoom back out here and I start rotating, that's going to be the pivot point. So I'll grab one of these little black boxes here and just start kind of nudging until that point lines up right there on my X0 line. Now I click off, close, and my heart is centered and oriented correctly. Now let's get into a little bit of node editing here. I've got this vector right here. I see a few angles that kind of bother me. Let's look up here. I have yet to see a ponytail that has a sharp angle in it like that, so I'd like to kind of smooth that out. The way I'll do that is I'll select this vector, And I'm going to go into node editing mode by typing the letter N. And we now see, we get in here, we see that we have two different colors of point here. We actually have three different colors of point. Remember now, green is our start point. That's where this vector starts. And as I mentioned in the first video of this series, this little arrow here indicates which direction this vector was drawn. It runs in this direction here, then back up that way, comes all the way around, and ends right back here, making it a closed vector. If you saw my video on CNC for the absolute beginner, what is a vector, you'll remember that on a closed vector, the start point and the stop point are the same point. And that is the case here. What I want to do is I want to kind of smooth out this ponytail here, and I have several ways I can do it. Again, we have the green point, which is our start point. We also have these blue points here, and then we have these black points here. The difference is these black points without a control handle are just simple points. This indicates that this point here to this point here, this span, is a straight line. And the same here. From this point to this point, this span is a straight line. This span here is a curve. We can tell that because of the handles. And these control handles will control the shape of that curve. Well, one way to smooth out a rough angle like this, where you have an angle that you don't really want, is to convert this point from a straight point to a smooth point. And the way to do that is put the cursor over that point. Then you'll notice it turns into a set of crosshairs. Right click on that point, and right here we have smooth point. If you look off to the right, we also have a keyboard shortcut. In this case, it's the letter S, meaning that I can also just hover my cursor over this point, type the letter S, and it's the same thing as right-clicking and come to this menu. Since I already have this menu open, that's what I'll use. I'll click on this, and that changed that black point to a smooth point. Now, it also had the effect of adding this control handle and this control handle where there was no control handle. So I now have three different ways of controlling this span. Now that right off the bat smoothed out that angle a little bit, but I want to go ahead and smooth it out some more. And here is where we get into judgment calls. That may be perfectly acceptable to you. And it is a pretty fine detail. And I know I spoke about not getting stressed about the fine details, but this is one of those details that I think adds or takes away from the drawing. So what I'll do is I'll bring my cursor up here onto this point, left click and hold, and you see how it turned the control handles and that point red. And I'm just going to drag it down a little bit, then release. Just moving that point had the effect of smoothing that out. Now I can right click to deselect, and I no longer have quite so sharp of an angle. Okay, just kind of smooth that out a little bit. And if I'm honest, I'm not really much for this sharp angle here. So let me select that. Yeah, I'll do the same thing right here. Zoom in some, right click, smooth point. And Yeah, I think that's acceptable just as is. I don't really need to do much with it. But I will explain a little bit about what these control handles do. These control handles allow you to control where the spans in between the points go, how much curve is placed in them, or how flat they are. If I come up here over this control handle here, I can move these a couple of different directions. I can turn them. I can pull them out to the left, or I can pull them in to the right. And what this does is this controls where this span is going to turn and where this span is going to turn by basically what you're doing is you're rotating this point. So if I grab this control handle and spin it, you'll see that I'm pulling out the span right next to the handle I'm touching, but I'm pushing in the span on the other end of that point. So it's in essence, it's rotating that point. Let me go ahead and Control Z to undo that. Now, if you only want to control this span and not affect this one quite as much and don't want to rotate the point, you can grab the handle by putting your cursor over it and lengthen it. Now, this has a much larger effect on the span right next to that handle than it does on this span down below. Control Z to undo that. Whoops. Control Y to redo that. It does have a small effect, but not nearly as dramatic as it would if I turned the handle. If I decided I wanted to bring that span in a little bit, I could just kind of pull it down, shorten up that handle, so I don't have quite as bulbous a vector right there. We'll right click that to check on it, and I think that looks okay. There's one more up here that kind of bugs me, and it is a small detail, but it's this point right here. I think in this case what I'll do is I'll hover my mouse over it, right click, and just delete that point. I don't really see any purpose in having that sharp point right there. So that's it with me being picky about this drawing. And as it sits right now, I could go ahead and start calculating toolpaths and VCarve this into whatever surface I'd like. But before we do anything else with it, I want to get into the discussion about these points in the node editing mode. Now you see how many points we have. We have some smooth points, we have some Bezier curves, we have some standard plain old straight lines, but we have quite a few points here. It's generally accepted that the fewer points you have in a vector, the better. Because remember, back into node editing here, each one of these points is a calculation VCarve has to make. So if you look at how close these points are together, VCarve, when we go to calculate the toolpath, has to calculate the steps it's going to need to take to go to move the bit from this point to this point, and from this point to this point, then from this point to this point. So the fewer points we have in any given vector, the better. And probably the easiest way to reduce the number of points that we have, especially in an imported file like this where we've done a bitmap trace, is to apply curves to these vectors here. For that, we'll come over here under Edit Objects, and we'll come down to the third row to this icon right here, Curve Fit. Fit curves to selected vectors. Now when I click on that icon, we open up the Fit Curves to Vectors form, and it gives us a preview of all of the all of the points we have in these vectors. And there are quite a few. But what I can do is I can fit curves here in the form of either circular arcs, Bezier curves, or straight lines. Now we already have a bunch of straight lines. And I don't really, I want to keep the natural flow, the curves here, so I'm not going to convert this to straight line. I tend to convert curves to Bezier curves because they're more controllable to me than a circular arc is. So I'm going to select Bezier curves. Then we'll move down here to the tolerance. The tolerance is when these Bezier curves are applied to these vectors, how closely do we want that vector to follow this? Should we allow it to smooth out these vectors some? Personally, I think that by keeping our tolerance set at 10 thousandths, you've got the best of both worlds. It does follow the vectors as you have them now, but it allows VCarve a little bit of leeway to move this point a little bit so we get one curve here instead of two. That's what that tolerance is. The lower the number, the tighter it's going to fit to this vector as it sits right now. If you want it to stick real close, go for a lower number. If you want to allow it a little bit more leeway to be more flowing, go with a little bit higher number. I tend to keep it right here at 10 thousandths. That's a good happy medium for me. I do want to keep my sharp corners, and I want to replace the selected vectors. This is important. If you don't have this box check marked, what'll happen is it will apply curves to these vectors and keep these vectors. You will have duplicates. It's important to make sure that replace selected vectors is selected. Then we'll click preview. And when I click preview, watch the number of points that we have here and see if they reduce any. Okay, that reduced quite a few. If I zoom up in here, I no longer have 2 points side by side. And if you recall down here, I had 2 points side by side on the corner and up in this area as well. What it did was it eliminated those straight lines, applied Bezier curves, and allowed VCarve to kind of give it a little bit of a flow. So that's always a good thing. I'm going to hit OK. Then I'll come back here and do the same to this one. Select that vector. Curve fit. I'm going to keep the same tolerance. Bezier curves. Keep sharp corners. Replace selected vectors. Preview. That reduced the number of points just fine. I can live with that. Click OK. We're all set. That reduced the number of points that we have within the drawing, made things a lot smoother, and it will reduce machining time a little bit anyway. Now from here, I want to modify this design a little bit because I want to put a border around this entire heart here. About a 3/4 of an inch border, maybe 1 inch. What I'm going to do is select all of the vectors again. Then I'm going to come down here to offset, and I'm going to make a mess. Let's offset these outwards by, let's try 0.75 and see what we get. I want to create sharp corners. I don't want to delete the original, and I don't want to select the new vectors. Let's go ahead and offset this and see what we get. Yeah, look at that. What a mess. I'm going to go with that. Let's go ahead and close it. Mark, what have you done? Well, I've made a border around my heart. So now let's clean a lot of this up by doing some node editing. So first thing we'll do is select the vector, type N for node editing, and I want to get rid of all of this in here in the middle that I just created. And I'll do that by coming right over here, hovering over this point right here, right click, and I want to cut the vector. And we see our keyboard shortcut is C. So I'll cut the vector there. Then I'll come down here, put my cursor over that point, type C to cut the vector again. Now we see that all of this in here is selected. I can just tap delete on my keyboard and that's gone. We'll do the same over here. Select this. We'll put our cursor right over that point there. Type the letter C, cut the vector. Select this vector over here. Come up here and again I'll just pick this arbitrarily. Type the letter C, cut the vector. Select this. Tap delete and all of that is gone. Now what I want to do is I want to join this up down here. Make it nice and straight to finish up our heart. But as I look up here, I see that this kind of kicks out a little bit. So let me look for where that kick out begins, and I think it actually begins up about here. Put my cursor over that node, type the letter C. This stays highlighted. I can delete that. This here also continues a little bit of a curve to the inside. So if I select that vector, try to look here and see, figure out about where that curve starts. I can delete that point and then just kind of one by one take a look, see about where that curve starts. And I think that should do it. Maybe one more, and I'm tapping D on my keyboard as soon as my cursor gets over. Yeah, I think that'll work out just fine. Okay, that leaves us with this vector down here. So select it, and this is kind of sort of straight here, but we start getting into a bunch of little points right here, and that indicates a bit of a curve. So I'm going to put my cursor over this point, type the letter C. I've got a long bit here. I'm going to put my cursor over this one, type the letter C. I'll select this point here, delete it, or that portion of the vector there. Now, if we look up here, we've got a little bit of a bend. I'm not sure that I like that bend, so I will show you another quick shortcut. I want to delete this entire span of the vector. Now, I could come over here and cut and then delete this point, or I can just bring my cursor over here and you see that little tilde shows up. And when I have that arrow up against this span of the vector, right click, delete span. Select that and that span is gone, and this is now that vector starting point. So that has those taken care of. And the only reason I'm saving these is because these I think are the proper distance away from this vector here. So what I want to do is I want to bring these down to another point here. So let me go ahead and drag this down just past my X0 line. Select this one and do the same. Drag that past the X0 line. Then we'll come back and trim that up later. Now I can come up here and grab this green start point, bring it up, and drop it right on the end of that vector. Then come back over here, grab this green start point, drag it up here, right over the end of that vector. Okay, we've got the beginnings of something here. Let me go ahead and right click to get out of node editing mode. Grab my scissors to trim that vector there, that vector there. We'll close that. Select this vector. Hold down Shift. Select this vector. Now we want to join these. So we'll come up here under Edit Objects, join the vector. Starting out with 2 open vectors, we'll have 1 closed when we're finished. There we go. Now we have a little bit of an angle here and a little bit of an angle here, another one here and another one here. Basically because what we've done is we've taken what was a curve and what should be a curve, and we've created straight lines. So now what I want to do, select, once again, come back over here, fit curves to selected vectors. Oh boy, look at all the points. We need to get rid of a lot of those. And by converting these to curves, we'll be able to more handle these angles down here. I want to convert it to Bezier curves, and I sure want to replace these selected vectors. We'll hit Preview. Oh boy, is that better. Click OK. Now, with that vector selected, I could go into node editing, and we can kind of start playing around a little bit here and try to smooth this out. We have this angle here which we don't need. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that point right there by hitting D for delete. Then I'll do the same up here. Zoom in, D for delete. Now you saw how my vector snapped in real quick. That's because I removed those 2 points and it took the shortest distance between these 2 points. Now I can grab these control handles, kind of bring them out and smooth out. And this is kind of an arbitrary thing. It's just simply your choice and whatever looks best. Right click to deselect, and I think that looks just fine. Now we'll do the same thing here. I'll zoom in my cursor over that point, tap the letter D to delete that point, come up here to this point, tap the letter D, then zoom out. Now we have kind of a straight angle. I'm going to grab this handle here and kind of pull it out a little bit. Grab this handle and kind of pull it out some, just slightly rotating it, that handle. And again, this is 100% your choice, whatever looks best to you. If you think it needs a little bit more sculpting, click on that handle, kind of pull it out a little bit. Or grab this handle here and drag it down some. I don't want a huge curve in this, but I don't want any sharp angles except at this point and that point. So let me right click, and I think I can live with that. And with none of my vectors selected, right click again to come out of node editing. Then we'll zoom to selected. You're going to find that there are many cases where there is no magic number, there is no magic formula. It's just going to rely on your eye. If you find something that you think needs fixing, you are the best judge of that. You are the final arbiter on what you like and what you don't like. Sometimes there is no best, sometimes there is no right or wrong way to do it. If you're the kind of person who would prefer to have that be sharp angles here instead of these curves, by all means take care of them. If you would rather open this up a little bit more so that her ponytail wasn't so pronounced, by all means take care of it. Personally, I think I like that, so I think I'm going to stick with these vectors right here. What I want to do with these vectors is I want to VCarve this portion out of the center here and this here, so that these silhouettes remain raised along with our outline border here. So what I'll do is I'll select both of those, come over here under Edit Objects, and I'll group those two objects. Now, while I've got this selected here, I'll hold down Shift, select this, and I want to once again align this to the center of my material. Now we're almost ready to start calculating toolpaths. Something that I've been failing to mention when I get to this point is, at the very beginning in job setup, I will tell you that for layout purposes, I want my XY datum in the center. Well, now that the layout is finished, I can change my XY datum from the center if I choose to. Personally, when I'm outside working on the CNC machine, I set my XY datum to the lower left corner. So before I calculate my toolpaths, I need to change that XY datum from the center down to the lower left corner. Now I can do that here. I can come back into Job Setup and select the bottom left corner, click OK. Or when I'm ready to switch over to the Toolpaths tab, I can come over here under Material Setup, click the Set button, and I can change that right here too. I can put it back in the center, I can put it down in the lower left. This does exactly the same as that over there in the job setup. So before I calculate my toolpaths, I'll select to put my X and Y datum in the bottom left corner, click OK. Now again, I want to VCarve all these spaces out of here and inside here. So with those vectors selected, I'll go ahead and do a VCarve/engraving toolpath. I'm going to go ahead and carve this to a flat depth of 0.1. To me, it's not quite 1/8 of an inch. That's more than deep enough. I don't know that I'd want to go any deeper than that. But that gives me a little bit of wiggle room in case I have to do any sanding up here. I am going to use a flat area clearance tool, a 1/8 inch end mill. I think I forgot to tell you that I'm going to be using a 60-degree V-bit. If I already told you that, disregard. And I'm going to do the flat area clearance in a raster pattern, meaning that that bit's going to come back and forth and clear out this material here. I prefer to do raster to offset. I'm going to do a conventional cut. My raster angle is going to be 0, which means again the bit's going to go back and forth from side to side. If I wanted my bit to go up and down, I would change that raster angle to 90. But I want it to go side to side along my X, so I'll leave that raster angle at 0. And I'm going to call this VCarve the figures. and we'll calculate. And as you see, it's created two tool paths, one of them for the V-bit, the other for the 1/8 inch end mill. I want to go ahead and select this tool path, change my tool path color to red. Then I'll select this tool path, change that tool path color to red. I can tell by the little boxes here that's what color it is. Then I'll go ahead and preview all tool paths. And there's our V-carving. I think that looks pretty sharp. If we look down here on my X, Y, and Z0 display, down here at the bottom of VCarve, we can see that it cut 0.1 inches deep. Everything looks good. There will be a little bit of cleaning up in the corner here, but that's typical of V-carvings because that 1/8 inch bit can't get into everything. All in all, it looks good. So now I want to come do the outline, and I think I'll do a beveled profile. So we'll do a profile toolpath, and I want to put a bevel on the edge of this heart. So my start depth will be 0, and I think I want to cut down to 0.125. That'll put an 1/8 inch bevel on the edge there. I want to use a 90-degree V-bit, so I'll select that. It'll do it in 2 passes, that's fine. I want to machine it on the vector. Cutting conventional. I don't need to change anything else, so let's go ahead and call this profile bevel, and we'll calculate that toolpath. Then we'll preview that selected toolpath, and we can see that that 90-degree V-bit came along and did a plunge cut and cut all the way around on the vector. Okay, looks good. Go back to my 2D view, close the preview window with that vector still selected. I'll do another profile toolpath, but this time I want to cut all the way through the material and then about 5 thousandths more to make sure I cut all the way through the material, whether I've got any surface variations or not. So I'll type in Z plus 0.005. That's saying the Z height that I entered over here in job setup, that's my material thickness, plus 0.005 inches. Now when I tap the equals key on my keyboard, that sets the cut depth. I don't have to do the math. I do need to change the bit, however, because I'm not cutting all the way through with a 90-degree V-bit. So I'll select a 1/4 inch end mill. Click OK. It's going to do that in 6 passes. That's fine. I want to machine to the outside of the vectors this time. I do want to do a separate last pass with an allowance of 0.01. If I were going to add tabs, now is when I would do so. I'm not going to add tabs for this demonstration. I'll show you why in just a second. I do want to ramp in my plunge. I want a smooth ramp over a distance of 1/2 inch. That's double the cutting diameter of my bit. And I want to call this the profile cutout. We'll calculate. It's warning me that it will cut through the material. That's okay. I want it to. Now we'll preview that toolpath. This is the reason why I did not add tabs for this preview. I can double click the waste and it will eliminate that so we can get a good look at the project as it's finished. And I think that's going to work out just fine. There will be a little bit of cleanup up here on the top because that round bit can't get down and create a sharp point. But a little bit of file work, not much, and that'll clean right up. So I think, all in all, maybe a little bit of sanding on the edges. There's still a little bit of an angle there that I could smooth out more in node editing if I wanted to. Maybe reduce a little bit of curvature here. But this was never meant to be a straight line. It was meant to have a bit of a curve to it. So all in all, I think it's a good design. I think it's a great little image, a great little project. And it's something that you can adapt. Once you have saved this project, just like this design could be adapted to so many other things. It could be used in various locations. I mean, I took the basic outline that we just did and I adapted it to a picture frame. And I think that that would fit in beautifully in, say, a wedding present or something like that. I also then put it into one of Vectric's free projects, the Paradise box. And all I did was ungrouped the vectors on the artwork for the top and deleted the the vectors that were inside this circle and put this in. I think it'd make a great little inlay on the lid of a jewelry box, especially if you were to backfill this with epoxy and then sand it all flush. It would also make an excellent VCarve inlay. So think outside the box a little bit. So I hope you got something out of this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up down below. Then if you haven't already, go ahead and click that subscribe button and then click that little bell so you'll be notified the next time I post a video. I'll put a link to a playlist for every video in this series right about here in the end screen so that you can check out all the videos in this series. Whether you subscribe to me or not, I'd like to thank you very much for watching, and y'all take care.